What is your definition of beauty? What does a beautiful person look like to you? I want you all to take a moment and construct a picture in your mind of what you first think when you hear these questions. Got your answer? These are 2 questions I asked about 20 students about a year ago at a predominantly white high school in the area. For context, the school is made up of about 80% white students and 20% students of color. I first became fascinated with these questions about 2 years ago when reading an NPR article about colorism, the discrimination of people with darker skin tones. In the article, the author declared that beauty is not in the eyes of the beholder, but of the colonizer. In other words, our ideas of beauty are not just made up of our own personal preferences. Rather, they have been colonized, and this has been happening for centuries due to the standards and ideals of the Western world. I found the article really intriguing. My instinct told me that the author was right. It also told me that these standards were harmful, especially for people who don't fit into society's beauty norms. I want to find out how our culture, our backgrounds, and our history all make up what we think of beauty today. So I decided to study and measure perceptions of beauty through my AP research class. Out of the literal millions of possibilities, I decided to measure perceptions of beauty and how they influence students of color at a predominantly white high school. One of the main themes of my research was the concept of Eurocentrism, which is the centrality of European culture in our society, defined by Egyptian political scientist Samir Amin. Although there was existing research between the relationship of adolescence and beauty standards, none addressed such in the context of Eurocentrism. So I set out to find how our world's history, in relation to Eurocentrism, impacted adolescents at a predominantly white high school. Before conducting interviews, I hypothesized 3 main things. The first was that students of color and white students would both be affected by Eurocentric standards. The second was that Eurocentric standards would be present at the high school. And the third was that students of color would be more impacted by the Eurocentric standards than white students. And now for the results. My research found that Eurocentric standards were not just present at the high school, but highly influential, consequently emotionally harming students. Eurocentric standards aligned with the participants' responses when asked the question, what do you believe are the standards at your high school? This table represents the 3 commonly most listed features, which include being skinny, being of the white race, and being blonde or having straight hair. Other examples include having light-colored eyes or a small nose. However, interestingly enough, the third part of my hypothesis ended up being wrong. White students actually felt more of an impact of beauty standards compared to students of color. As a student of color who's attended a predominantly white high school myself, I truly believe that students of color would understand beauty as more harmful than white students. However, it ended up being the opposite. So how did I reach this conclusion? In understanding and transcribing interviews, I categorized each participant as having either a colonized or a decolonized mindset. So, as you can see here, this graph represents the amount of students who had a colonized versus decolonized mindset. More students of color had decolonized mindsets, while more white students had colonized mindsets. The way I categorized these interviews was through the questions I asked at the very beginning of my talk, the ones that you guys answered just a few minutes ago. So, what differentiated a colonized mindset from a decolonized one was how people responded to those very beginning questions. Let's say that you responded only by using physical features and not any non-physical features when describing beauty or ugliness. Then I'd classify that as having a colonized mindset. For example, one student shared that a beautiful person to them is mainly about hair color, eye color, and lips that are not obnoxiously thin. However, on the other hand, students with decolonized mindsets understood beauty through many different dimensions. They tended to deconstruct the Eurocentric standards. Some never mentioned them at all. One student said, I don't conceptualize beauty as one type of thing. I see beauty in many different types of people. I can't really imagine what a picture in my mind of what a beautiful person is. So that goes back to the part of my hypothesis that ended up being wrong. We see the explanation here. White students actually felt more of an impact of the beauty standards because students of color viewed beauty as more abstract. When asked the question, do you feel that you fit beauty standards, only 3 white students said yes, while every other single person, including all students of color, said no. Although beauty standards are meant to maintain colonial ideals and benefit white people, they actually ended up doing the opposite. White students felt more of an impact compared to students of color. This represents how detrimental these standards are for everyone involved. Now, reflecting a year later, what strikes me really much is how my own understanding of beauty had been colonized before starting my research. As I listened to hours and hours of transcribed interviews, I gained more and more personal insight, transforming my own colonized mindset into a decolonized one. Circling back to the questions I asked at the very beginning of the talk, maybe even your own mindset has changed as well. Thank you.